Welcome back to our series on salvation. It is once again a great pleasure for me to be here with you. So during the last presentation, we discussed what happened after Pelagian controversy. How did the church react to Pelagian controversy? And we discovered that there were two reactions under the umbrella of semi-Pelagianism. But there was one version of semi-Pelagianism and another version of semi-Pelagianism that is today found in Roman Catholic teachings. So we're going to continue what we've discovered. What did Catholic theology do with all of this? And what is the meaning of Catholic rituals and so on? So we remember this slide that there was this radical separation between sanctification and justification, total not related in teaching of Pelagius and teaching of Augustine. They were unrelated, and those bookends, and everything is in between, and we're going to work with this. So we're going to talk about Catholic Church in the next couple of presentations. So Catholic way of salvation. It all begins with human nature. Remember, I preempted you with this during earlier presentations that human nature is very important, understanding of human nature. What happened to human nature when Adam sinned? Is it passed on, or what happened, so on? Those are very important questions. Everything in Christian theology really goes back to that question, what happened to human nature? So let us explore a little bit what is the Catholic teaching with regards to human nature. So Catholics believe that pre-fall humans were perfect. They were totally perfect. The fall of Adam and Eve did damage human free will, did not eradicate human free will entirely, just damage, as we saw in the last presentation. There's a damage to humanity, but not total damage, like Augustine would say, but there's just damage. So humans are morally sick, they're not totally damaged. God initiates the process of salvation, as we discovered. God is the one who initiates the process of salvation. So what is human response? When God initiates, what is the human response? And here things are getting interesting, because human response is desire for baptism. For infants, this desire is created in the parents. Parents want to bring their child to be baptized into the church. Okay, sometimes it's people who are around the children. Like for example, I had a friend who married a young woman who became an Adventist, and they got married, but parents of that young woman were still Catholic. Okay, so they were Adventists and they didn't want to baptize their child in a Catholic church, but those grandparents felt the burden that the child need to be baptized, the children need to be baptized, because they will be condemned. They'll be damned they will never be able to be saved if they're not baptized as infants. So one day, my friend tells me, he and his wife decided to go on a date, and they left the children with grandparents, and they were gone over the weekend. So on Saturday, the grandparents took the children, the Adventist children, took them to the Catholic Church and baptized them. Catholic theologians would say that this is God placed the desire to baptize those kids, those children in the church. For adults, you want to be baptized into the Catholic Church. It is God who creates that desire in the heart of the person. So the big question is, what does baptism do? It's a huge question for the Catholic theology. What does baptism do? What is the purpose of baptism? First of all, baptism cleanses the soul from Adam's guilt. This is a very important thing. This is why Roman Catholics baptized infants. Because if you're not baptized, you're guilty of that sin. If you baptize, the guilt is removed. So that's why they want to do it as quickly as possible, because there's a removal of that guilt. The infant is no longer guilty of what Adam did in the Garden of Eden. Very important point, very important for Catholics to have those infants baptized as quickly as possible. Then there is another function of baptism, is justification by faith and regeneration. You may ask, whose faith? Well, the parents' faith or grandparents' faith, or when you adult, your faith. Baptism brings that justification and regeneration. In Catholic terminology, baptism is a moment when you become born again. So this is distinction between what we would say. You can say when you baptize, you become born again. So this is just, you are justified. We call it initial justification in Catholic theology, and regeneration, liberation from sin. So here you are in Catholic Catechism on page 323, justified by faith in baptism, they are incorporated into Christ. So infants are justified by faith. Now the third element is very important. During baptism, you have infusion of special grace of God. So baptism is not just nothing. You're baptized, there's infusion of special grace into your soul, into your immortal soul. It's called habitus, okay, in Roman Catholic nomenclature. So the special purpose for it is, we will explore it in the second presentation on Catholicism. But here's the quote from Catholic Catechism. The two quotes actually. The grace of Christ is the gratuitous gift that God makes to us of His own life, infused by the Holy Spirit into our soul to heal it of sin. You see this? This infusion of grace heals the soul, according to Catholic theology, heals the soul of sin and to sanctify it. So baptism is very important for Catholics. It is the sanctifying and deifying grace received in baptism. It is in us the source of the work of sanctification. That last sentence is very important. I'll play with it, work with it in next presentation. Baptism is the source, that infusion of grace is source of the work of sanctification. We'll work with this. And the second paragraph, baptism enables and commits Christians to serve God by a vital participation, cooperation, in the Holy Liturgy, and they exercise their baptismal priesthood by the witness of holy lives and practical charity. So you've got this idea of effusion of grace, and that effusion enables something else. We'll explore it carefully in the next presentation. The next point of baptism is endowment of church membership. Once you baptize, you become church members. That means all infants who are baptized, they're automatically church members, and you never get rid of church membership. That means all those people who are baptized as infants in the Catholic Church are forever members of the Catholic Church. You can't get rid of that for a specific reason, which is my next point. So when the Catholic Church says that they've got billion plus membership around the world, that includes people who left but who were baptized as infants in the Catholic Church. And the final, a very important point, is a permanent change of human nature. Something happens to the soul through that infusion of grace, something happened to your soul. It's like a permanent mark that is given on your soul. So here is again quote from Catholic Catechism. Baptism imprints on the soul an indelible means you cannot delete, spiritual sign, the character, Dominicus character it's called, which consecrates the baptized person for Christian worship. Because of the character, baptism cannot be repeated. So it is impossible within the Catholic Church to be rebaptized. Now, sometimes we practice rebaptism. It is impossible to be rebaptized. And this is one of the reasons why Catholics persecuted Anabaptists, because Anabaptist means rebaptizer, okay, being rebaptized. And that was total heresy, because you cannot be rebaptized. So the Catholics, as well as Protestants, I'm going to talk about this later, persecuted Anabaptists because they were advocating rebaptism. That's what it means. So all those things mean, those 5 points means that baptism is essential for salvation. Unbaptized people, Catholic Church teaches, cannot enter the kingdom of God. So let me focus for a moment on that last point. This is the most important function of baptism. Are you familiar with this sign? Okay, this sign represents branding. Okay, branding. So this is a branding iron, and thus this iron is heated, is very hot, and it's the back of the cow is touched, and it creates a permanent mark. All right, so this is like permanent branding. You can never delete this branding for the life of the cow. You cannot delete this. It's a permanent branding on this animal. This is a kind of analogy. All right. So when you are baptized, God brands you permanently with the Lord's character or the seal of the Lord. That is impossible to be deleted. It just cannot delete it. That seal washes the guilt of original sin, and that seal does something else. It opens the way for grace to come through the sacraments. It makes the Catholic person forever. You are once a Catholic, you are Catholic forever. A Catholic can leave the church, but the seal remains. When you come back to the church, when a person who is baptized comes back to the church, he reactivates the seal. The seal can never be deleted. That reminds me of the case several years ago that happened in France. A gentleman by the name René Lebouvier, he was a 71-year-old Frenchman. He decided that he wanted to get debaptized. Throughout his life, he explained he became agnostic and non-Christian, and he decided, I don't need a baptism. I'm still on the church roll of a Catholic church. I want to get rid of my baptism. And so he wrote a letter to a diocese, and he said, I want to get debaptized. The church, of course, refused because there's no policy, there's no theology for debaptizing. So Lebouvier took the church to court. And there was this court case. It was a very awkward court case because according to Catholic theology, you cannot get debaptized. So it was very awkward for Catholic theologians to explain to the judge that this is impossible, just can't do it. So in his response, the Catholic bishop would reply this: one can't be debaptized. Baptism changes one permanently before the church and God. One could refuse the grace offered by God, the grace offered by the sacrament, refuse to participate, but we believe that the individual has still been marked for God through the sacrament of baptism, and that individual at any point could return to the church. So this is basically how it works. So here I've got another symbol. You're probably familiar with that symbol. Have you ever seen that symbol on some pieces of equipment? What is it? It's a symbol of choke, right? A symbol of choke. And I've often see it on various pieces of equipment. Here's whippersnipper. Okay, you got this choke. What is the purpose of choke? Okay, you close the vent of air, so you got higher mixture, so that engine can get warm. So this is kind of a similar kind of picture to this. So you've got this symbol, and it's open. When you are born, this is closed. So it's closed to God's grace. God's grace cannot possibly go through this. All right. So you're born closed. So when baptism happens, this is what happens. It suddenly becomes open. All right. It just changes from closed to open, and it's a permanent situation. Another way to explain it would be through using a cross section of a pipe. So this is a pipe, and in the middle of the pipe you see a valve. On the right, the valve is closed. On the left, the valve is open. So before baptism, that valve is closed. You cannot receive God's grace. Impossible. But baptism opens this valve, and suddenly you've got the pipe is open. Okay, and that pipe is Dominicus character, and it's welded shut permanently. It can never be reversed. It's just permanent thing. But that opens the way for God's grace to come in to your life. So baptism is actually a very important element of Christian life. And this is something that I need to introduce right now so that we can use this terminology in the next lecture. What baptism does, it creates in your soul something that is called ontological righteousness, or essential righteousness, or internal righteousness. Baptism makes you, from a bad person, makes you a good person. From an unrighteous person, it makes you a righteous person. After baptism, you can say, I've got my righteousness. my righteousness. That's what baptism does, because of that infusion of grace. That's why baptism is so essential, because from unrighteous you become righteous. You can really have your own righteousness. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough, because the implications of this idea are immense. And you shall see this in the next presentation. So in summary, baptism removes the guilt of original sin. Baptized people are no longer condemned. And that's why infant baptism is so essential. And this is when people talk about original sin, we need to reject original sin. They often mean this, because original sin leads to infant baptism. And this is true, but it's only a version of original sin that leads to infant baptism. It's not the idea of original sin, but one particular version of original sin that leads to infant baptism. Baptism infuses the soul with special kind of spiritual grace. And there's a purpose for this, and I'll explain this in the next presentation. And the result is that people become morally righteous. This is the ontological righteousness. This is the moral righteousness. From bad person, you become good person. And baptism is essential for salvation. So let me close with the quote from Catholic Catechism. Once again, holy baptism is the basis of the whole Christian life. Did you catch it? This is that pipe here. All Christian life, the gateway to life in the Spirit, the door which gives access to the other sacraments. That's exactly what I said. Remember this open close, all right? When baptism opens it, and it gives the door for other sacraments to work. Through baptism, we are freed from sin and reborn as sons of God. So this is baptism. Baptism is very much essential to Catholic life. It's absolutely crucial. It's the door that gives opening to the other sacraments. And the implications of this ontological righteousness are immense, as you shall see in the next presentation. Thank you.